evening and thanks very much for being with us. We begin tonight at the Courthouse Hotel, where Braden Bushby was back in court for day 2 of his highly anticipated trial. The 22-year-old is being tried for manslaughter in connection with the death of 34-year-old Barbara Kentner back in 2017. Today, the court heard from testimony from the pathologist who performed Kentner's autopsy. Troy Charles has details.
Braden Bushby arrived at the Courthouse Hotel on day 2 of his trial. Tuesday saw the Crown attorneys call Dr. Toby Rose as their second and final witness. She's the pathologist who performed the post-mortem on Barbara Kentner. During her testimony via Zoom, Rose explains that Kentner's cause of death was multi-leveled and somewhat complicated. Rose said that the question she had to answer was, did the injury and resulting surgery from the thrown trailer hitch contribute to Kentner's death? Did it hasten her death? And did she die sooner than she would have had she not been injured? Part 1 of Rose's findings found that the immediate cause of death was pneumonia and acute chronic peritonitis, which is inflammation of the inner abdominal wall, and that was due to the traumatic rupture of the small intestine, which in itself was a consequence of the blunt force injury to the abdomen. Part 2 of Rose's findings showed that end-stage liver disease was also a contributing factor in Kentner's death, while not directly related to the immediate cause. Rose said it was impossible for her to say that only the liver disease was the cause of death. She said that Kentner was a very sick woman who would have ultimately died from her liver disease, but she would not have died at the time she did had she not been injured. Dr. Rose was on the stand for over 2.5 hours, and court was adjourned at 4 p.m. with the defense's cross-examination of Dr. Rose set for 10 o'clock Wednesday morning. Before the trial began, there was a protest organized by a local group who call themselves Not One More Death. The group calling for justice for Barbara Kentner first gathered at the intersection of Algoma and Red River and then marched their way over to the Courthouse Hotel on Camelot Street. Mane Shikabe spoke on behalf of the group and what they are hoping comes from the trial.
Justice. Everybody wants justice. That's what they're talking about. They're talking about for low-income families and for First Nations and for Black families and that kind, that we don't get fair justice.
Troy Charles, TBT News.
A Thunder Bay man is facing sex charges for an alleged incident involving a minor. City police were alerted last week about claims dating back to July of 2019 when the complainant was just 12 years old. The accused was working as a Scouts Canada leader at the time and knew the alleged victim through the program. Police say the incident did not take place at a Scouts Canada event. 21-year-old Stephen Koopman turned himself in to the Thunder Bay Police headquarters yesterday and has been charged with sexual assault, sexual exploitation, and sexual interference. He remains in custody until his next court appearance tomorrow. And infrastructure, both new and old, was the overriding theme of last night's City Council meeting. Councillors voted to include a proposed Northwood roundabout in the 2021 capital budget. They also begrudgingly gave $500,000 for some unanticipated extra repair work on the Marina Park pedestrian overpass. And Council voted to have the Fort William Gardens reopened sooner than City staff had intended. Ryan Benazzo explains.
City Council has taken a big step toward approving Thunder Bay's first roundabout in a high-traffic area by voting to include the proposed project at the corner of Edward Street and Redwood Avenue in the 2021 budget. Some, like at-large Councillor Rebecca Johnson, worry about pedestrian safety.
I'm going to stand in that middle place waiting for cars not to come and hit me.
But administration cites studies that show roundabouts reduce injury accidents by 75%. The vote passed 9-3.
That's a reason why we should do this. Save people from injury, save people's lives. Period.
The roundabout still needs final approval during next year's budget deliberations. There's major frustration over a $500,000 cost overrun for repair work on the Marina Park pedestrian overpass that began back in the summer. City staff say metal that couldn't be seen until the span was removed was in far worse shape than anticipated when the city initially set aside about $1.3 million for the job. Feeling boxed into a corner, councillors decided to hold their nose and approve the extra money.
Missing that amount makes us all look foolish.
We're in a position right now, again, where we're stuck. We got to pay.
Council also heard that the city is now anticipating a $6.3 million hit from COVID-19 this year. $5 million from tax-supported operations and about $1.3 million on the rate-supported side. That deficit will be fully covered by money received from Ottawa and the province. The total is down from a $7 million estimate back in July. But the numbers may change after Council decided to reopen the Fort William Gardens as early as the first week of December, ignoring warnings from administration over high building operating costs and staff shortages.
I believe there will be definite need for additional ice times. The Fort William Gardens being really the largest rink is probably the best rink to have open in regards to social distancing.
Ryan Benazzo, TBT News.
Ontario is reporting big new COVID-19 numbers today. The province added a record 1,050 new infections and 14 deaths. The Ford government is bringing in a tiered system on Saturday. The 5 categories are prevent, protect, restrict, control, and lockdown. Colin DeMello has more.
After months of confusion over exactly what would trigger COVID-19 restrictions, the Ford government finally provided clarity.
We're implementing an early warning system with clear criteria to help inform when restrictions should be tightened or loosened on a regional basis.
Ontario is now moving to a color-coded system for public health measures. 5 stages in total, ranging from relaxed measures to a full lockdown, and each will come with clear criteria for what it'll take to move in and out of a lockdown.
It takes a scalable, gradual approach that includes introducing less invasive preventative measures earlier to help limit the spread of transmission and avoid broader closures.
The new system will have immediate impact for the areas of the province with high case counts. Under this new chart, Toronto, York, Ottawa, and Peel are currently considered red zones with stringent Stage 2 restrictions. Beginning this Saturday, November 7th, however, Ottawa, Peel, and York regions will become orange zones, which will allow affected businesses to reopen.
This means gyms and indoor dining will be open with the capacity limits and restricted hours.
Toronto will soon follow, becoming an orange zone on November 14th. Several other regions of the province, including Brant, Hamilton, Durham, and Halton, would be designated yellow zones this Saturday, which would place strict measures on bars, restaurants, and gyms, but allow them to remain open as well. While the rest of the province would be green zones, with the normal pandemic protocols like social distancing and small gatherings. But the plan is being criticized for setting the targets too high. In order to become a red zone, for example, a region would have to have a positivity rate of 10%, a number of large outbreaks, and hospitals and ICUs in the region would have to be on the verge of being overwhelmed.
The problem is we keep looking for a way to negotiate with this virus, to find a way to trigger some sort of middle ground, when the virus doesn't really allow that. Places that have successfully managed this pandemic have done so by decisively acting with restrictive measures.
Ontario's top doctor says they are trying to achieve balance.
While closures are sometimes necessary to interrupt the transmission of COVID-19, we recognize their harms, including to people's income, employment, and well-being.
And the province is trying to avoid layering a mental health crisis on top of a pandemic.
As the water crisis in Nescantaga continues, 2 members from the community have made their way to Toronto to try and incite action from the Ford government. Kiiwetinoong MPP Sol Mamakwa is hosting Nescantaga members Lawrence Sakani and Elder Alex Munoz, who are at Queen's Park for a multi-day sit-in at the legislature. The details of the sit-in are still being hashed out, but the members plan to be there all week. The majority of Nescantaga's 230 residents were evacuated after running water was shut off due to an oily sheen in their water reservoir. Nescantaga has been under a boil water advisory since 1995. During a media event at Queen's Park, Mamakwa was joined by Sakani and Munoz. The Zoom call was also joined by Nescantaga Chief Chris Munoz alongside community members.
Water is such a basic thing. Water is such a basic necessity. And Nescantaga has had no water for over a quarter of a century. We're here to have equitable access to clean drinking water for these families, for this community. So
they deserve clean water. All the children back in Nishkanaga deserve clean water.
Chief Munoz also provided an update saying the Canadian Rangers and contractors are on the ground in Neskantaga, but there is still no timetable for the evacuees to return to their community. A new display at Thunder Bay City Hall will pay homage to the land on which the city was built and the treaty that led to the creation of Fort William. The mayor and the city's Indigenous Relations Manager unveiled the newest edition, a copy of the Robinson Superior Treaty. This comes during Treaty Recognition Week, which is celebrated the first week of November every year. Mayor Bill Morrow says this will help move the yardstick as they seek to create more conversations about reconciliation.
I think the single best thing, in my opinion, that we can all do to enhance relationships and acknowledge history is through whatever educational opportunities present themselves. I think that is the long-term solution. Personally, I really feel that. This is one small example of that.
It's also a good conversation piece to encourage dialogue, to talk about treaty relations and also talk about you know, some of the difficult truth, because with reconciliation, you need to share some of the difficult truths as well.
A second copy of the treaty will be displayed upstairs in council chambers over the holiday season. And there's one new case of COVID-19 in the western part of the region. The Northwestern Health Unit says it was recorded in the Sioux Lookout area and is one of 4 active cases. Meanwhile, the medical officer of health has growing concerns about the recent spike in cases in Manitoba, and she's strongly advising against visiting there. Closing the border is not something that Dr. Kit Young-Hoon could mandate, but she says they've been closely monitoring the situation to the west. Winnipeg is being deemed a red zone, with the rest of the province listed as orange or a restricted level. Young-Hoon has some advice for those who do travel to Manitoba and who they should try to avoid upon returning.
They need to be considering staying home as much as they possibly can and avoiding interactions with others as much as they can during those 14 days. We're also aware that there's certain populations that are at higher risk. So these are individuals who are over the age of 60, have other chronic conditions, and are immunocompromised.
Young-Hoon advises those with less serious medical appointments in Winnipeg to consider delaying them to a safer time. Thunder Bay Police have taken $225,000 worth of drugs off the street after a pair of drug busts. Those also put 4 people in custody. The seizures both occurred last Thursday, one in the 400 block of Memorial Avenue and the other in the 1500 block of Oliver Road. Police found large quantities of cocaine, fentanyl, and fake Percocet pills containing fentanyl. A 50-year-old man and a 20-year-old woman from Thunder Bay, as well as 2 men, aged 26 and 27 from the GTA, were all arrested. The charges include possession of cocaine and fentanyl for the purpose of trafficking and possession of property obtained by crime over $5,000. The 26-year-old is also charged with having a fake ID and resisting and obstructing a police officer. Town Council in Red Rock is considering whether to rezone a scenic piece of waterfront land for a new $25 million subdivision proposed by Bruno's Contracting. Municipal officials say there's no risk for the community, but there are some residents fighting against the project. Adam Riley reports.
It was a packed but socially distanced house at the Red Rock Legion as members of Town Council met with the public regarding an amendment to change the official plan and zoning bylaw. The town's pitch? Allow them to rezone and let a developer redevelop this section of property located just north of the town into a 28 to 30 unit residential area at next to no cost for the municipality. The reactions from the crowd varied, from those who flared the dramatics.
This meeting would have never taken place, except one person wrote a letter.
Are you out of your mind?
He's the guy that's going to lose, not us.
I'll tell you, the man in the corner will bail as soon as it goes south.
To others who were cautiously optimistic.
If we rezone this from hazardous land to something that can be developed, is the municipality responsible for paying for this land to be remediated so somebody can actually put an application to develop on it?
What will council use to guide that decision? Like, at what point will council be satisfied
And what is council using to determine that this is sufficient for the environment?
Stefan Huzan is a planner with Northern Planning who has been hired by the town. He says planning involves a large amount of paperwork and steps and explains some of the safeguards in place for a potential development.
If council adopts the official plan amendment in zoning, they will be sending a signal saying these lands are intended for residential development, and development will only be able to occur if council is satisfied that all environmental concerns have been identified and properly addressed.
Mayor Gary Nelson sees this project as a win for the community and notes many of the homes in Red Rock were built just after World War II. He says there is no risk for the town as expenses for the project will apply only to the developer.
That's the ideal spot down there that we want to rezone and put the houses. And we have a very good developer from Thunder Bay that wants to do it. He would put in all the sewer, water, hydro, whatever's needed, streets.
Nelson says there is a small group of residents who would protest the project no matter where it would be proposed to go, and he plans to make the push for the project, noting if it doesn't go through, the potential for over $1 million in desperately needed tax revenue goes with it, to which he gave an ominous warning to the audience.
And this is not a threat, but I'm just saying that if it's not rezoned, I can tell you that within 3 to 5 years, the taxes in this town will have to go up.
No date for a vote on the amendment has been set at this time. Adam Riley, TBT News.
Fiona, November is my new favorite month. I love it. I expect every day to be above seasonal from now on. We're just trying to soak it up.
Well,